Hi there, I'm Lily. Welcome to the Vital Horse podcast. I'm a veterinary surgeon passionate about what our animals' behaviour can alert us to. I focus on nurturing the innate nature of animals to address the deep roots of health, well-being and vitality. Our relationship with our horses is an inextricable part of this. I am guided by what they show me. Many people say, if only they could talk, but they can tell us so much and we can communicate back. This podcast is about you being able to help your horse fully by finding out what's going on, deciding how best to help, and then doing this ethically and effectively. In this way, we can investigate and treat behavioural signs and underlying health problems, pain, or dysfunction in our horses while actually improving our relationship with them. Let's find out how. In this episode, I look at what are the determinants of posture in horses and why does posture matter at all, and what is it that we should be looking out for, and then what should we be doing about it when we find some of the things that I'm going to talk about in this episode. So posture really is an indicator of both health and well-being. What posture is the relation of the various body parts to each other and also to the ground. So where they are in space and their orientation. And as distinct from conformation, because sometimes those two terms can be used interchangeably, but they are actually two distinct things. As distinct from conformation, posture is actually changeable. It might be habitual and usual for a horse to be in a particular posture, but it's actually not the same thing as conformation, which is more the size and the shape of the horse's skeleton in relation to all of the sizes and shapes of the various parts of the horse's skeleton in relation to each other. Now, how they are oriented to each other can be changed. The absolute size and shape is pretty much fixed once an animal has finished growing. There are some changes that can happen during growth within reason, and there are also some changes that can happen during adulthood a bit more slowly than when the bones are more immature. So there's remodeling that can happen. So various postures can become more conformational because they can become more fixed. But they can also, to a certain extent, there can be some change to remodeling of bone as well. Throughout life, it's just quite slow once the horse is an adult. But they are two separate things, although they are related. So posture is something that we can influence for sure. It can change either quite slowly or actually quite rapidly, as we will talk about a bit later on, the various factors that feed into that. And it is an indicator, and also it affects physical, mental, and emotional health and well-being. So there are aspects of the nervous system state that a horse is in the moment or transiently, and also where they the mode that they tend to be in habitually, or maybe that they're perhaps a bit stuck in. And there are various factors that perpetuate how flexible a horse's posture is and how habitual it is. So whether they are able for it to be momentary and transient, or whether they tend to get stuck in a particular posture. Once they have a habitual posture, that can be either healthy and functional, or it can be less so, and it can actually perpetuate other problems. It can actually cause pain, discomfort, and dysfunction to be stuck in certain postures because certain structures in the body are overloaded by abnormal or dysfunctional postures, both standing postures and moving patterns. And therefore, posture is important to pay attention to because it may be perpetuating certain physical and also mental and emotional states of being and it becomes a sort of a bit of a spiral between those things. And it can also be a real indicator of where to start an investigation if you're concerned that there is something that isn't normal that's going on with your horse. Maybe there are behavioural signs. Maybe you're suspicious about an injury that you haven't seen happen, or pain somewhere in the body. So momentary and transient postural changes can be, it might be tempting to think that they are more of a mental or emotional indicator. They can also be physical. So, for example, acute pain states, which then resolve, can mean that a posture is transient and then they go back to a different posture again fairly quickly. Or you can get particular postures in response to a particular functional need. For example, perhaps traveling, they might adopt a particular posture. Perhaps slippery or uneven terrain, they may adopt postures that are not usual for them. Particular weather types, that's quite common to see in driving wind and rain, to see postures that we wouldn't think of as ideal for standing. And that's a discussion that may need to be had about how long each day are they spending in that posture. If they adopt a less than ideal or not a very healthy posture when the weather is bad, perhaps also steep inclines may induce different postures. So those are some transient effects on posture. So if horses are in a new mode or a stuck point or a new habitual posture, so rather than a transient one, there are various reasons for that. And it's worth asking the question for why horses are adopting particular postures. So this is both standing and moving. And what I mean by particular postures are the orientation of their limbs, the position of their head and neck, the shape or the contour of their spine, so along the top of their spine, the shape and the contour of their pelvis, and then related to those things are things like foot shape and various habits. So they may change these positions and orientations depending on the context. So if they are standing resting, if they're standing eating, maybe if they are alert to something, and then there's all sorts of changes that can happen once they start to move. So in different gaits, walk, trot, canter, and through transitions. And you can observe these things from in front, from the side, from behind, from above. So there is a lot that goes into defining the horse's posture. Some common postural changes to see in domesticated horses include changes in the limb orientation. So that's where the limbs become non-vertical or asymmetrical in relation to a plumb line, which points downwards as the pull of gravity. So the horse has slanted limbs when viewed from the side. That's quite a common one to see in domesticated horses. And another is in the changes in the width. So when viewed from in front or behind the horse, changes in the width of stance of their limbs. So they can indicate various things that are going on anywhere really from the feet up the limbs into the upper body. Other things to notice are head and neck position. So quite a common combination of non-vertical limbs, as in slanting, and usually the slanting is happening towards the belly. So the limbs are non-vertical when viewed from the side, and they slant towards the belly. And that can be both front and hind limbs, or it can be predominantly more one or the other. And that sort of gives you some indications for what's going on in their body. And often with that, they will have a more raised head and neck position than you might expect when they're resting. So they look a bit awkward when they're standing there resting with their head and neck with quite a bit of tension and held raised, sometimes with their back dropped, and sometimes with their pelvis tilted. But all of those things can be there's different possibilities for all of those parts of posture. So if we talk about the drivers or the things that govern posture in a normal situation, there are some important structures. So the whole body is involved in both the input to the nervous system and then replying or responding to the nervous system's requests that it sends back out that govern the orientation of the limbs, the position of the head and neck, everything, back and pelvis and tail and all parts of the body. So all parts of the body are involved, but there are three main areas in a normal, non-injured horse which give kind of the bulk of the information for the body to be able to make those decisions about posture. And the point of making those decisions about posture is really to keep the horse upright and to protect the nervous system so that horses don't fall down and bang their head, basically. So protecting the brain, protecting the spinal cord. And then, of course, higher functions in the brain can give the horse the ability to make choices about other things that they do. But the kind of really base level about maintaining a posture is that they are a stable body that isn't falling down and banging their head on the ground. So in order to do that, on various inclines and over uneven terrain, and with various different things happening throughout the day, the main areas of the body which give the nervous system the information about where are we in space right now are the upper neck, so near the pole, basically. All of those little, well, there are lots of neck muscles, quite delicate neck muscles in that area which act a bit like gyroscopes. So they've got lots of sensory nerves in them which send information about position to the brain. So things like stretch and orientation, so that the brain can know where is the head on the neck and where is up, which way is up, and are we standing on an incline? Are we on uneven ground? That kind of thing. The second area is the teeth and the jaw. So particularly heavily innervated for proprioceptive input to the nervous system are the alveolar sockets that the teeth sit in the jaw, and the temporomandibular joint, the jaw joint itself. That sends a lot of information to the brain. And the jaw, because it is a movable structure on the skull, and because a horse's head is quite heavy, it has a lot of influence, because gravity affects it a lot, has a lot of influence over how the brain knows how the head is oriented on the neck, and whether we are tilting one way or the other, whether we're pitching forwards or pitching back, what our balance is doing. Then the third very important area for proprioceptive input to the nervous system is the feet. There are lots of proprioceptive nerves, or nerves that inform the brain and the spinal cord on proprioception in the feet. And this might be a good point to talk about the fact that, therefore, distortions in these structures can send somewhat wonky messages to the nervous system. So if you have a foot that is distorted through maybe a chronic pathology, or perhaps through a trim or the application of a rigid shoe and changes in the structures of the foot, then the messages that the nervous system are going to be getting from that foot each time it contacts the ground are going to be a bit distorted themselves. So moving into when posture becomes abnormal, often it's because there is some distortion in the messages that are getting to the nervous system from these three main areas. And of course, there can also be signals from anywhere else in the body. But talking about these three main areas, they're all highly affected by domestication, by the lifestyle that we give our domesticated horses, by the athletic requests that we make of them, and by our management, what we choose to do in terms of managing the horse. So, for example, we put headgear on horses, we put bits in their mouths, we put pressure on their poll. We do dentistry or not, and to varying different techniques. So we may change the chewing surfaces of the teeth through that, or we might not. We feed out of various feeders and hay nets, which can affect the mechanics of the temporomandibular joint and can affect tension in the poll. We confine them. We limit the terrains and the surfaces that they move over. We trim their feet, or perhaps not. We apply either rigid metal shoes, slightly less rigid types of composites applications to their feet. So all of our kind of day-to-day management and domestication practices in horses have some effect, whether improving or perhaps deteriorating the ability for the nervous system to know what is upright, what is tilting, what's symmetrical, what's asymmetrical. And therefore, the signals that it puts out for the neuromuscular system to affect the whole anatomy of the horse and choose the orientation of all of their body parts in space habitually and moment to moment in changing circumstances. So another important effect on posture, of course, is injuries. And this is not just in the limbs, but it could be in the head, neck, withers, the scapulae, so the top of the front limbs, the rib cage and sternum, the back, the pelvis, the tail, the abdomen, the thorax, I've said the rib cage and sternum, and of course the limbs and the feet. So injuries in any of these areas can also change a habitual posture, either through distorting proprioceptive input via the injury, or perhaps by creating pain, dysfunction, and restrictions as well. So physical restrictions, for example, perhaps scars, for example, bone remodeling in response to an injury, or maybe habitual posture. And then also physical restrictions include distortions or changes in shape of the hoof capsule, and can include things like shoeing applications that can constitute a distortion, and also jaw alignment and chewing surface and tooth misalignments or healthy alignment. They can all act as actual physical restrictions to returning to a more normal posture. So going back to things to notice about posture, I mentioned earlier limb orientation, and that may be viewed from the side, in front, or behind, head and neck position, spinal contour, pelvis shape, and these can be viewed from the side, in front, behind, and above, because sometimes you will appreciate different things from those different perspectives. And then over time, we get a really good idea of what they've been doing posture-wise by looking at their foot shape, because that shows us where they have habitually been loading. A really important thing to notice about posture is what happens to all of the things that I've just mentioned, depending on context. So what do they do with their limbs, with their head, their neck, their spine, and their pelvis when they are resting, standing up? What do they do when they're eating? What do they do if they are sort of just relaxed and normally alert? And then also we can have a look at how those things are oriented and how they move during movement, and whether that's free, at liberty, with no human intervention whatsoever, so moving themselves around, making choices in their environment, or how do those change if we are asking something of them, either at liberty, or how does it change very significantly when we add equipment often. if we were to add even sometimes just a halter, but particularly things start to change often when you add tack and more gear. Eating is particularly influential because it takes up, or at least should take up, a lot of their daily time budget. So they should really be eating forage for around 16 to 18 hours a day, sometimes a bit longer even. It depends a bit on their calorie needs and the quality and the digestibility of the forage, and also on their level of stress or frustration around food and whether they feel okay about taking a break from eating, and also the provision. So whether it is ad lib, sort of free choice. So those terms can sometimes be confusing, but what I mean is that it doesn't run out. So free choice ad lib doesn't necessarily mean that it's loose for guzzling, but as to whether in the course of 24 hours, if they were to keep eating, would they run out? So eating is particularly influential because if they spend all of that time per day in an unhealthy posture, so maybe overloading certain structures in their body, that will have a big influence on whether there are certain structures that are close to the threshold for injury when they then either are asked to do something athletic or they perhaps frolic free in turnout. Then they can have more of an injury event than long-term chronic micro damage. This is where observing their habits is not separate from also looking at how their lifestyle perpetuates those habits. So, do they stand with their head, neck, and limbs in a habitual position all day because they only have one option for eating forage? For example, do they stand downhill on their right front leg because they're on a slope and they have to turn their head and neck in a curve to the right because the hay net is in a corner of a stable and it doesn't work for them to stand in the dip and eat in the other direction, or there is no way of standing in another direction. So that would be an example of them not really having very many choices about how they can stand, and therefore it becomes that actually if they did have other choices about how they stand, that probably is how they would do it because their body has been molded over time to stand in that position, and we would have to do some things differently in order for it to change its habits. In that position, over time, you may get changes in the shape of their feet. So because they would be putting more weight on one limb than another over time. And also, you'd likely get a change in their chewing function. So they would chew in one direction over another, and they may even get a slant to the chewing surfaces of their teeth because of their jaw sliding one way down the hill habitually more than the other. So that's an extreme example, but it may apply to a surprising number of horses. You may also notice changes in other body parts when one body part changes. So for example, if you change the feeding height, if you change the height of a hay net, you may notice that a horse changes the orientation of their limbs. So you could have hay on the ground, and you might notice that the horse's front limbs are in what's known as a split stance. So they aren't vertical, one is forward and one is back. And that is, in some horses, it will be the same limb always that is put slanted forwards, and the same one that is either upright or slanted backwards when they put their head down to graze or to eat hay off of the ground. Then you might notice that there is a height at which the limbs become habitually more vertical. You may notice that there is a height at which the limbs are camped under, so they are non-vertical, slanted towards the belly. You may find that there's a height at which they are more vertical again. So changing between, you can try all sorts of heights actually. You can do all the way from the floor to having their muzzle above wither height. and I wouldn't recommend having a very high net for all of their feeding, but it is actually quite helpful for them to browse at higher feeding heights for some of the time, but I wouldn't do that as their only choice. The other important context to observe horses in is resting. So I'm actually going to do an episode on sleep and rest coming up. But resting standing up is an important part of observing a horse's posture, because it should be that they are able to rest in a stable posture, so with their limbs vertical, because then they have minimal muscular effort of holding themselves up against gravity, because their limbs are acting as vertical columns. If their limbs are slanting in some way, it means they're going to need to use more muscular effort to counteract the effects of gravity and stay standing and not hit their head on the ground. So if they are resting not in that neutral posture, then they actually are unlikely to be getting as good quality rest. And they may be, again, overloading structures in their body, which may push them close to a breaking limit if they do other activities at other times, or it may mean that it's harder for them to heal from an injury, or they keep re-injuring. And proximal suspensory desmitis is definitely something that comes to mind with habitual postures. So posture can tell you about the state of the horse's body, mind, and emotions, both moment by moment and in the longer term. Particularly helpful for tracking what the horse has likely been doing longer term is actually looking at their feet. But certainly their standing posture and resting, standing up, and eating are particularly influential. Abnormalities indicate that something is needed, so something is missing that is needed. That might be that we need to investigate for underlying pain or dysfunction, or it might be that we need to look at their lifestyle and management and to see whether maybe they don't actually have an injury currently or pain, but that could be coming if we don't address their lifestyle and management to allow them to adopt more healthy functional postures for the majority of their day. The way that the horse habitually uses their body is very important to the sessions that we then do with them. So if we're riding and training, we're usually doing that for a much smaller portion of the horse's daily time budget than them standing around eating and resting and moving between. Hopefully they are moving as well as eating, rather than just standing in the same position all day eating. And then that will definitely affect our sessions with our horses. So examples that do need addressing include a limited choice of head positions for eating, confinement for much of the day or night, not being able to move at the same time as foraging, definitely training gadgets that adjust head position, and trimming or shoeing practices. Variety or lack thereof of surfaces and terrains that they are able to move over. And there are a lot of other things, but basically the aspects of lifestyle and management that affect the poll, the teeth and the jaw and the feet are particularly influential. And then if they do get an injury, then that is going to also influence posture quite heavily. So we don't want horses banging their head, pulling back when tied. We want to be definitely cognizant of the dental care that they are getting that allows for normal, non-restricted chewing function. We want to ensure plenty of free choice movement and the ability for them to forage at varied head positions. And we want to be cognizant of their foot morphology and what that means for comfort, structure, and function, and whether we need to change anything about our trimming or shoeing practices. Posture is also a way of monitoring our progress with making these changes and with recovering from injuries. If you're interested in learning more about this, I have an online workshop coming up on attuned assessment, and looking at posture is a large part of what I do in my approach called attuned assessment. So the online materials will be available from the 15th of November, and then we'll have 3 live Zoom Q&A calls on the 26th of November, the 10th of December, and the 17th of December. And there's also a 1-to-1 30-minute coaching call with me included, so that you can delve into your unique situation with your horse and see what it is that you might need to focus on. We look at more than just posture in this. So a significant part is, are you concerned as to whether your horse might have underlying pain as a reason for particular behaviours? Or a health condition is the other thing that may be non-painful, so it may be something else that is contributing to behaviours. And then also, how does your horse learn and communicate? And can we really improve that communication and understanding between us? We have a discussion group on Facebook as part of the workshop, and there is also the option of joining an ongoing subscription where I do actually a monthly ongoing Q&A call for members, and we also have guidance exercises that I release every month, and the topic of those is guided by the questions that come up in our monthly Q&A calls. So to sign up, go to nurturingnatureequine.co.uk/attune. And I am actually also running an in-person version of the Attuned Assessment Workshop at my track system whole horse rehabilitation facility in West Sussex. That is happening on the 15th of November. That you may be too far away if you're listening to a podcast to come to that, but there, if you can get to West Sussex, that's happening on the 15th of November. But the online version is available. All of the online materials will be available opening on the same date. And stay tuned for the next episode. And the next podcast episode, in fact, is on the subject of sleep and rest. Thanks for listening to the Vital Horse podcast, where you can find discussions focused on helping horses in ways that combine scientific principles and evidence with compassion and understanding. Do subscribe if this content has rung true for you. To work with me in a way that honours both head and heart, check out my online and in-person offerings at www.nurturingnatureequine.co.uk. If you are facing problems or are trying to answer questions with your horse, remember that physical, mental and emotional well-being are inextricably interconnected, that there is a wisdom to nature and to the body that we can assist, and that cultivating meaningful relationships with our animal companions holds an important key to the well-being of all of us. Deep awareness and a compassionate process will enable us to find sustainable, ethical solutions. See you for the next episode and look forward to working with you too.